Good morning and welcome to FPF's Privacy News TV Education Edition. My name is Erica Ross and I'm the Communications Associate for FPF's Education Privacy Project. So I'm just going to jump right in. It's been a big couple of weeks into the student privacy world. Amelia, Director of the Education Privacy Project at FPF, testified at a student privacy hearing before the House Committee at the Department of Ed, and also spoke yesterday before the Federal Commission on School Safety's public listening session on school safety. There's also been some major releases. The Department of Ed's Privacy Technical Assistance Center released a technical assistance letter on best practices on protecting student privacy when schools are involved with signing up students to take SAT or ACT. And Fordham's University Center on Law and Information Policy released a study called Transparency in the Marketplace for Student Data that examines the practices of student data brokers. So here I have Amelia and Sarah Collins, Privacy Counsel for the Education Privacy Project at FPF, here to answer a few of our questions about the projects that FPF's privacy team has been tackling. So, just jumping right in. Amelia, what were the major issues raised at the congressional hearing?
So thank you very much, Erica. Probably the biggest thing that we heard from my testimony and from the testimony of the district superintendent and the state chief information officer who were there is that training is vital when it comes to student privacy. Somewhere between 45 and 95% of all accidental data leakages or intentional data breaches occur because of human error, whether it's someone attaching the wrong attachment to an email or sending the wrong information or leaving their laptop in their car and having it stolen or having a student hack into their account because their password is password123. Overwhelmingly we heard that the type of support that states and districts need from Congress is to make sure that districts and states, particularly small districts or underfunded districts, need is funding to be able to support making sure that everyone who handles student data is trained on how to protect it.
Well, great. So, student data privacy and its protection is not a new topic. So, why do you think this is happening now?
Absolutely. So we've seen a lot of hearings on this topic from the House Education and Workforce Committee. I think we've had about 4 over the past few years. And what I was told about why this hearing was happening now was they wanted to make sure that members understood what was actually happening on the ground and had examples of how districts and states are dealing with this and how edtech companies are helping them ensure student privacy and where they need federal support. This is likely teeing up, not this year, but maybe next congressional session, a FERPA rewrite, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which is the primary federal student privacy law.
Okay, great. So I want to switch gears just a little bit. So yesterday you spoke at the listening session before the Federal Commission on School Safety. So what was the main message you were trying to communicate to the panel?
So it's very important as we consider how to protect student safety that we also keep in mind that we need to protect student privacy. So the overall message I wanted to give is not that states and districts should do one particular thing, whether it be not surveilling students or having video cameras or social media monitoring, but that whatever states and districts do and whatever the Federal Commission recommends should have privacy safeguards built in order to make sure that that data does not inadvertently harm students down the line.
So just to push back on that a little bit. So why shouldn't schools' only priority be keeping kids safe as their only priority?
Absolutely. So when we talk about keeping students safe, I think the president mentioned in his statement when he formed the commission that we want to make sure that kids have opportunities as they grow. And a lot of the questions around student privacy are about maintaining those opportunities. When you have more surveillance, whether, again, it's looking at social media accounts or it's surveillance cameras, other systems, you tend to have schools punishing students for more minor offenses that they wouldn't otherwise have found out about. We've also seen that students don't feel safe in schools that have a lot of surveillance. So they often feel like they're in a prison-like environment where Big Brother is always watching, and they're hindered from critical thinking, from exploring ideas, and being able to fail, which is really important for students to be able to do as their brains are evolving and they're learning more and more in school. So keeping students safe and keeping student information private and maintaining their opportunities later in life. So the dumb social media posts they had at age 13 is not following them around when they're applying for college or a job is really important and something that can easily go hand in hand without endangering the safety of students.
Well, yeah, thank you for that insight. Sarah, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. So I know you had a large part in drafting our blog response to the PTAC Technical Assistant Letter on SATs and ACTs when schools are implementing those exams. So I wanted to talk about the optional surveys that are offered during these exams. So these optional surveys administered to students as part of the SAT and ACT can violate FERPA, IDEA, and PPRA if appropriate transparency and consent and other safeguards are not taken into action. So what are these optional surveys to start with?
So before you take your SAT or ACT, there's a ton of demographic questions before the test. This includes stuff you'd expect to see like name, birth date, but these also go into greater detail. So they may ask you what courses you're taking, what you're interested in college, maybe activities you've done, sort of to get a broader picture of the student.
Okay, so why do people feel, or how can these violate these three laws?
So the PPRA in particular really touches on this because this is about, the law is focused on student surveys. And one of the main reason it can be violative is students actually can't give consent on whether to take these surveys or not. The consent right is held by the parent. So while these are optional surveys that the student can choose to fill out, the student really doesn't have the choice in this situation. It's the parent, which is where the violation is occurring.
So to either of you, what advice would you give to SEAs or LEAs in response to this guidance?
I think it's really good for schools to review PPRA. I'm not sure if we've said what PPRA is yet. It's the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. It is right after FERPA in federal statutes. And as Sarah was saying, it governs all school surveys and gives parents certain rights about whether the student takes the survey at all, and when it comes to certain questions, such as the sex, drugs, and rock and roll questions, you can summarize it as, but it also includes things like what your religion is, what your family's income is, and if any of those types of questions are on a survey, parents get additional rights to both view the survey and be able to opt out. So I would advise that schools look at PPRA because part of the law is that districts need to have a policy on surveys that they created in consultation with parents. And if they don't have that policy, then they're not able to then make the decisions they need to make about what surveys they allow and don't allow in the district. I don't know if you have anything to add, Sarah.
Well, I would just say as a bigger practice, whenever you're contracting with these companies, whether it's at the state level or the district level, it's really important to have written agreements. Mm-hmm. So you decide what information is going to be shared and how it's going to be used, and solidifying those agreements so you know what is happening and it's all articulated can really stave off some of these problems and concerns right from the beginning.
So great. So I know this is the first major guidance that PTAC has released on PPRA.
Absolutely.
So what would you say are the implications for ed tech companies moving forward?
I think it's what Sarah just mentioned in terms of written agreements. So this technical assistance is specific to college admissions exams or exams used to evaluate all the students in the state. PTAC actually goes into some pretty detailed guidance about what needs to be in written agreements between districts and companies. And so ed tech providers should take a look at that guidance and make sure that their current agreements with districts are in line with what PTAC is now saying is required.
Okay, so I want to move on to the CLIP study. So yesterday, Fordham's University Center on Law and Information Policy, CLIP, released a study called Transparency in the Marketplace for Student Data, which examines practices on student data brokers. So Sarah, could you talk a bit about the study and its findings?
So what this what this study's goal was to understand what the marketplace is for what Fordham was calling student data, or what could sort of be understood as data under about minors under the age of 18. So they were trying to do two things: map who was selling the data, what data that they had, and where this data was coming from. And as they found out, it's a really opaque practice. There's no requirements that data brokers right now need to share this information, so it can be really difficult to figure out where it's coming from. But they did find out that at least 12, I believe, companies are selling lists that would be around students under the age of 18. And some of the more inflammatory examples was 14 to 15-year-olds interested in family planning, or Asian American students in New York City. So they found that there's clearly a market for this data, but they weren't able to really discern where it was coming from. But the study didn't find that it was coming from schools or ed tech companies. What it seems to be is from maybe website surveys. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add about that. From reading the methodology of the study and the study itself, the authors went into great detail to investigate what school practices were here and whether any information was coming from schools. Mm-hmm. And they pretty clearly found that the schools that they looked at were not giving information in any way over to these data brokers or to someone who is then giving the information to data brokers. However, what schools should be cognizant of is some schools may be giving a survey, and I'm trying to remember what the organization is, the National Research Center for College and University Admissions, which says on its website that the way that they get their lists of students is from surveys given by teachers and guidance counselors in school. So this comes back to the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment and what schools are required to do under that law when they give surveys. From the name of this organization, most schools, most teachers would not understand that this is an organization that is actively selling student data for non-educational purposes. So you may have schools that are giving this survey and not realizing where the data is end up or what it will be used for. So it's really important that schools take a look again at their PPRA practices, at their local policy, consult with parents, and see if there should be a more involved process to vet surveys and where the data will be going before teachers or guidance counselors are allowed to give surveys.
Yeah, so this paper is a big piece, big topic in the student privacy world. So what do you think the effects of the paper will be?
It's very possible that the paper could spur a lot of legislation. One of the big findings, and something we dug into in our response blog about it, is that most of this is not covered under FERPA or the 120 plus state laws specifically on student privacy passed over the since 2013. This is very specific to data brokers because none of the data is coming from schools or from ed tech companies that are serving schools. You don't have any coverage under those laws. And so states may want to act to limit the ability of data brokers to market to students. However, on the other hand, you do want to maintain the ability of students to get information about things that are useful to them, like scholarship opportunities or finding out about a college they never would have found out about. And so making sure that these laws are finely targeted and aimed at stopping the things we don't want to happen, but allowing the things we do want to happen, it should be really useful.
Yeah, so I want to thank you both for taking the time for me to interview you. I think it's important.